My coworker took credit for my project in front of the entire board. I sat quietly. Then the CEO asked one question only I could answer. There are 31 seconds of silence on the recording. I know because I've listened to it enough times that I could probably reconstruct it from memory. The particular acoustic quality of a 30-second conference room, the faint sound of someone's chair shifting, the almost imperceptible intake of breath from the woman sitting 2 seats to my left, and then the voice of Eleanor Marsh, CEO of Hartwell Capital Group, 17 years building one of the most respected mid-market private equity firms in the Southeast, asking a single question into, that silence. 31 seconds. That's how long it took for everything Ryan Caldwell had built over 8 months to come completely apart. I should back up, because the part of this story that people always want to skip to, the moment, the question, the look on his face, only lands the way it should if you understand what the 8 months before it felt like. The accumulation. The specific grinding weight of watching something you built get quietly picked up and carried away by someone who smiled at you every morning and called you a team player. I'm going to tell you the whole thing, because the whole thing is the point. I'd been at Hartwell Capital for 4 years when Ryan Caldwell joined as a senior associate. I'm a financial analyst. Technically, my title has changed since. But at the time, senior financial analyst, covering portfolio company performance, building valuation models, producing the analytical infrastructure that informed investment decisions worth, on average, between $40 and $200 million. I have a degree in applied mathematics from Georgia Tech and an MBA from Emory. And I am the kind of person who finds genuine pleasure in the specific, ordered satisfaction of a model that closes cleanly. My name is Vivian Park. I'm 32 years old. I grew up in Duluth, Georgia, and I have one of those faces that people consistently underestimate in rooms full of people who expect to be the most impressive person present. I've stopped finding this frustrating. I've started finding it useful. Hartwell was a good place to work, genuinely not in the performed way that people describe their employers when they think the employer might somehow hear them. Eleanor Marsh ran a lean organization with high standards and the specific culture of a place where good work was supposed to speak for itself. In theory, the theory was correct about 80% of the time. Ryan Caldwell arrived in January of the year in question, 34, MBA from Wharton, 2 years at a bulge bracket bank in New York, and the precise, calibrated confidence of a man who had been told he was exceptional often enough that he'd stopped questioning it. He had good hair. He remembered everyone's name on the first day. He laughed at the right moments and was serious at the right moments, and within 6 weeks had become the kind of person that people in the office talked about as a real asset. I'm being fair to him when I say this. He was smart. He had good instincts. He could read a room. He just couldn't build the models that let the room know what it was reading. That part was me. The project started in March. Eleanor had been looking at a potential acquisition, a regional healthcare services company called Pinnacle Med Group based in Nashville. Mid-size, growing, interesting margin profile, some complexity in their revenue recognition that required careful unpacking. She wanted a comprehensive valuation analysis, DCF, comparable company analysis, precedent transactions, sensitivity tables across 15 different operational scenarios. It was a big ask. The kind of project that takes 3 to 4 months if you're doing it right, longer if the underlying data is messy. Pinnacle's data was messy. Their CFO had been with them for 14 months after the previous CFO departed, under circumstances that were described in the data room as strategic transition, and that I fairly quickly understood to mean accounting irregularities that had been quietly corrected. This matters, because understanding that, finding it, interpreting what it meant for the revenue model, understanding how it affected the normalized EBITDA, required a specific kind of analytical excavation that I spent 6 weeks on before I had numbers I was willing to put my name on. Ryan was nominally assigned to the project. His role, as our managing director Frank Okafor had described it, was to coordinate the process and interface with Pinnacle's management team. Translation: he was the relationship manager. I was building the analysis. That's a normal structure. I had no problem with it. I'd worked in that structure many times. The problem was what happened to the language around the project over the following months. First sign, April. We had an internal check-in. Me, Ryan, Frank Okafor, who was our managing director and had been at Hartwell for 9 years. 12 minutes into the meeting, Ryan was describing the normalized EBITDA methodology I developed in a way that was grammatically first person. I approached it this way. I looked at the revenue recognition issue and determined, not Vivian's approach, or the analysis shows, just I. Frank didn't correct it. Ryan was the one talking. Frank was taking notes. I said, quietly, the methodology in section 3 came out of about 6 weeks of work on the revenue recognition piece. I can walk through the assumptions if it's helpful. Frank looked at me. Great, maybe save that for the full presentation. The meeting moved on. I told myself Ryan had just been sloppy with pronouns, that it was a habit of language, not intent. I told myself Frank knew the work came from me because he'd seen my drafts and my emails and the 17 questions I'd sent to Pinnacle's CFO between February and April. Second sign, May. Ryan forwarded an email from Pinnacle's CEO to the Hartwell managing team, Eleanor's level, and Frank's, with a note that said, good feedback on our model from their side, attaching Ryan's updated sensitivity analysis for reference. My sensitivity analysis, which I had sent to Ryan 2 days earlier, with a note that said, updated per our conversation. Let me know if you want any changes before it goes to Pinnacle. He had forwarded it to the managing team with his name on it. I found this this out because Frank mentioned it in passing. Eleanor liked Ryan's sensitivity table, and I had to stop and take a breath before responding. I went back to Ryan that afternoon. Professional, direct. I noticed the sensitivity analysis went to the managing team under your name. In the future, can we make sure attribution is clear when work product goes up? He looked at me. He had an expression I'd come to recognize over the following months. A brief recalibration, like a compass needle swinging, and then the return to baseline. Of course, you know how these things get formatted when you're moving fast. It wasn't intentional. You're a key part of this, Vivian. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows that. I told myself he was right, that it was a formatting issue, that everyone knew. Not everyone knew. June, July, August. The project deepened. Pinnacle's complexity increased the longer I looked at it. There were intercompany transactions between subsidiaries that required consolidation adjustments and a physician employment structure that affected revenue recognition in ways their own accountants hadn't fully accounted for. I built a separate submodel just for the physician compensation piece. It was 47 tabs and probably the most technically demanding thing I'd produced in 4 years at Hartwell. During this period, Ryan was in Nashville 3 times for management meetings. I was not invited. When I asked Frank about this, he said, "Ryan's handling the relationship side. We don't need to overcomplicate the optics." I didn't push it, but I started keeping records. Every model I sent, I version stamped in the footer. Hartwell Capital, Pinnacle Med Group Analysis, prepared by V Park. Small, 8-point font, easy to miss if you weren't looking. I kept a separate folder with email timestamps and draft histories. Every significant analytical output I sent first to my own personal email, so there was an external timestamp. I'm a data person. I document things. It's not paranoia, it's methodology. In August, Ryan sent me a calendar invite for the board presentation, October 14th. He had listed himself as the presenting analyst. My name was not on the invite. I emailed Frank, "I'd like to confirm my role in the October presentation. I've been the primary analyst on the model and would expect to present the analytical sections." Frank responded 12 hours later, "Ryan will be leading the presentation. Your work will be represented throughout. Happy to discuss." I stared at that email for a long time. Then I forwarded it to myself. I called my sister that night. Her name is Jenny. She's a civil litigator in Atlanta, and she has the specific bluntness of someone who has spent 15 years in courtrooms and no longer has patience for softening things. "Document everything," she said, before I'd finished telling her. Not for a lawsuit, maybe not ever for a lawsuit, but because people who keep records think more clearly than people who don't. And right now, you need to think clearly. What do I do about the presentation? Go to the presentation, she said. Sit in that room. Know everything. And wait. Wait for what? For the moment when his version of the story doesn't match the actual story. Because it won't. It can't. He doesn't know what you know. I sat with that. What if the moment doesn't come? Jenny was quiet for a second. Then you escalate, but try the room first. October 14th. Conference room on the 14th floor of the Hartwell building in Buckhead. A long table, 12 chairs, the kind of room that costs more per square foot than my apartment. The board was Eleanor Marsh, 2 external board members, David Chu, former CFO of a Fortune 500 healthcare company, 17 years in the industry, and Patricia Holloway, managing partner of a growth equity fund in Boston, with 22 years in private markets, and Frank Okafor. I was present as supporting analyst, which meant I sat against the wall, not at the table. Ryan stood at the front of the room with a clicker and 62 slides that I had built. He was good. I want to say that clearly, because it's true. He was polished, structured, confident. He walked through the investment thesis with authority. He presented the market context cleanly. He narrated the financial history of Pinnacle Med Group with the fluency of someone who had spent months immersed in it. He had spent months watching me be immersed in it, which is almost the same thing until it isn't. I sat against the wall with my laptop open and my hands very still in my lap. 40 minutes in, he got to the valuation, my DCF, my comparable company analysis, my physician compensation model. He walked through the outputs, the enterprise value range, the implied returns under different scenarios, and he used the word "I" 14 times in 11 minutes. I counted. I had nothing else to do. The board asked questions. Ryan answered most of them. David Chu asked about the revenue recognition adjustment methodology. Ryan gave a high-level answer that was technically correct, but lacked specificity. Patricia Holloway asked about the sensitivity of the returns to physician retention assumptions. Ryan said the model was conservative without quantifying it. These were not wrong answers. They were the answers of someone who had read the executive summary thoroughly. Then Eleanor Marsh leaned forward. She'd been quiet for most of the presentation, which was her habit. She listened more than she spoke, and when she spoke, the room changed temperature. She had a copy of the deck in front of her, but she wasn't looking at it. She was looking at Ryan. "Walk me through the consolidation adjustment on the intercompany transactions," she said. "Specifically, how you handled the elimination entries between the physician management subsidiary and the clinical operations entity, and why you chose the methodology you did versus the alternative approach." Silence. Ryan looked at the slide. It was slide 41. I knew every number on slide 41 because I had built it across 3 nights in August and revised it 4 times after conversations with Pinnacle's outside accounting firm. He said, "The consolidation methodology was, we approached it by," more silence. Eleanor waited. She was good at waiting. 31 seconds. I know because I timed it later on the recording. At the time, I just felt the silence accumulate the way silence does when a room full of smart people is watching something they're not quite sure how to name. Ryan Ryan said, "I'd want to make sure I give you the precise rationale rather than paraphrase. Can we circle back to that?" Eleanor looked at him for a moment. Then she turned her head, very slightly, and looked at me. "Vivian," she said, "you want to take that one?" I moved to the table. Ryan did not sit down. There was a moment, maybe 2 seconds, where he stayed standing, and then he sat. I pulled slide 41 up on my laptop and connected it to the room display, and I walked Eleanor through the consolidation methodology from first principles, the structure of the intercompany transactions, the reason the alternative approach, straight elimination without adjustment, would have overstated revenue by approximately $4.2 million annually, the accounting standard we'd applied, and the specific guidance from Pinnacle's auditors that I'd requested in July and incorporated into the model. It took 11 minutes. Eleanor asked 4 follow-up questions. I answered all of them. David Chu, the former healthcare CFO, asked 2 more. I answered those too. When I finished, the room was quiet again, but a different kind of quiet. Eleanor looked at Ryan. "Did you work through this with Vivian directly, or did she develop this independently?" Ryan said, "It was a collaborative process." Eleanor said, "I see. 2 words. The particular weight of 2 words from a woman who chooses them carefully." Frank Okafor, who had been very still at the far end of the table, looked at his notepad. Patricia Holloway, who had been at the table for 20 years and had seen every variety of this particular situation, looked at Ryan with the specific expression of someone who has just completed a calculation. The meeting wrapped up 40 minutes later. As people gathered their things, Eleanor touched my arm briefly and said, "Can you stay for a few minutes?" Ryan left the room without looking at me. Eleanor Marsh had built Hartwell Capital from a $40 million fund to a $2.3 billion platform over 17 years. She had done this in an industry that, when she started, had fewer than 12% female managing partners. She was 61 years old, she wore her gray hair short and her suits well-fitted, and she had a quality of attention that I had always found slightly unnerving in the way that very precise instruments are unnerving. You feel when she's looking at you that she is measuring something accurately. When the room cleared, she sat down across from me. "How long has this been your project?" she said. I told her. "March through October. The revenue recognition work, the physician compensation model, the 47-tab submodel that was still sitting on Ryan's desk because he'd printed a copy months ago and never returned it." She listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting. "Do you have documentation?" she said. "Yes. Send it to me directly, tonight if possible." I sent it at 9:47 p.m. from my personal email. 42 attachments. A cover memo that I spent 90 minutes writing. Organized, factual, no adjectives I couldn't back up, no interpretation beyond what the timestamps and version histories showed. Eleanor read it. I know because she emailed me at 11:23 p.m. "Thank you. I'll be in touch tomorrow." What happened in the next 2 weeks is, in some ways, less dramatic than the boardroom moment, but I think it's the more important part of the story. Eleanor brought in Hartwell's general counsel, a woman named Margaret C., who had spent 20 years in employment and corporate law after clerking for the 11th Circuit. Margaret interviewed me formally on a Thursday morning, with a recorder on the table and a notepad that she used with the focused efficiency of someone for whom every word carries weight. She had reviewed my documentation the night before. "The record is clear," she said after the interview. "The analytical work product is yours. The question is what the firm does with that information." Margaret also interviewed Frank Okafor. I don't know what was said in that meeting. What I know is that Frank sent me an email 2 days later, short, professional, carefully worded, that said he recognized he should have been more attentive to attribution throughout the project, and that he was sorry for the role his inattention had played. He had been sloppy, not malicious. I've thought about this a lot, and I believe it. He'd seen Ryan as the face of the project because Ryan had been the one in the room with management, and he'd stopped tracking the underlying work. That's its own kind of failure, but it's a different one. Ryan Caldwell was a different question. Margaret's findings, delivered to Eleanor in a memo I was not given, but which Eleanor summarized for me, were that Ryan had systematically misrepresented his contributions to work product in a pattern that extended across multiple communications over 8 months, and that this constituted a material breach of Hartwell's professional standards policy. He was given the option to resign. He resigned on a Thursday in late October. His departure was announced internally as a transition, with no further detail, which is standard, and which fooled approximately nobody who had been in the boardroom on October 14th. The Pinnacle Med Group deal closed in December. The deal memo credited the analytical work to me by name. Eleanor presented the completed investment to the Hartwell Advisory Board in January, and in that presentation she attributed the physician compensation model, specifically the methodology that had identified the consolidation issue and preserved $4.2 million in annual revenue accuracy, to my work, by name, in front of 14 people. I was not in that meeting. She told me about it afterward. I didn't know what to say. She looked at me with that precise attention. "You should have been presenting in October," she said. "That's a failure I own. It won't happen again." 3 months later, I was promoted to principal. It's a title that carries weight at Hartwell. It's the level between associate and managing director. And historically, the firm had promoted 2 people to it in the past 5 years, both of them men. I'm telling you that not to make a larger point than I can support, but because context matters and I want to be accurate. Frank Okafor remained at the firm. He was not promoted in the cycle that I was. I don't know if those things are connected. I've made peace with not knowing. Ryan Caldwell Caldwell. I checked LinkedIn about 6 months later, which I'm not proud of, but which I think is a universal and forgivable human impulse. He had a new role at a smaller firm. His profile described him as having led valuation analysis on a major healthcare sector transaction. I closed the tab and did not open it again. Here's the thing about the boardroom moment that I want to be careful about, because I've told this story a few times now, and I'm aware of how it can land. I didn't plan it. I didn't sit against that wall with a strategy. I didn't know Eleanor was going to ask that specific question. I didn't know that Ryan wouldn't be able to answer it. I hadn't arranged anything. I'd just spent 8 months doing the work, and I knew the work the way you know something when it came out of you. Bone deep, every assumption and adjustment and late night revision. He couldn't answer because he didn't build it. That's it. That's the whole thing. The justice in this story isn't poetic. It isn't satisfying in the cinematic way where someone gets humiliated or punished in some dramatic public way. It's quieter than that. It's the specific functional reality that you cannot fake knowledge you don't have, and that rooms full of smart people, eventually, given enough time and the right question, will notice the gap. I sat quietly because I trusted that. Not because I was passive, not because I was afraid, because I had built something real, and real things hold up under examination. And the only question was whether the examination would come. Eleanor made it come. One question, 31 seconds of silence. And then I answered it. I have a different office now. Corner window, actual door. A whiteboard I've already filled 3 times with models that are indisputably, trackably, unambiguously mine. On my desk, I have one thing that I did not have before October 14th, a printed copy of slide 41, the consolidation methodology, 47 tabs of work distilled into one clean, accurate slide. My name is not on it. I took the footer off when I printed it. I know whose it is. That's enough.